2 Kings 5. This is the story of a soldier who met God. It's a slice of life from the military world 3,000 years ago. It's the story of one man, a most unlikely man, a pagan general who met the living God. And what happened and how it happened and how his life was changed. Now this morning, this is all I want to do. I want to tell you the story. And then I want to tell you two stories that happened yesterday. And then I'll be done. 2 Kings chapter 5. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. Now Aram was the Old Testament word for Syria. So when you see Aram, just think Syria. Back then, as now, Syria was the enemy of Israel. And the king of Aram was a king by the name of Ben-Hadad II. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Syria. He, Naaman, was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded because through him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now bands from Aram had gone out, or Syria, and taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master," meaning Naaman, "would see the prophet who is in Samaria." Now the prophet who was in Samaria was Elisha. If only Naaman would see Elisha. He, that is Elisha, would cure him, that is Naaman, of his leprosy. Now, there are four things you need to know about Naaman. Number one, Naaman was the general-in-chief of all the armies of Syria. That means he wasn't just a general. He was the five-star general of the army. Think Colin Powell. Think Norman Schwarzkopf. In World War II terms, think Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander. He was the most powerful, most important man in the nation of Syria next to the king himself. Commanding general. He was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Incredibly powerful. And that's the second thing. He was a great man, meaning great in power, great in influence, and as we're going to see, great in wealth. Third, he was a very successful soldier, valiant in battle. What that means is, in fact, the text says, the Lord gave him victory. Now, Naaman was a Syrian, which means he was a pagan. He was from a pagan nation. He followed a pagan religion. Yet the God of Israel had given him victory in battle, even though he didn't even recognize the God of Israel as the one true God. So he was the general-in-chief. He was great in all of his doings. He was a successful general, and he had leprosy. I don't think today we understand the emotional import of those words. Perhaps the best way to say it is that leprosy was the AIDS of the Old Testament. Get it? And you died. Get it? And you became an outcast. Get it? And people didn't want to be around you anymore. Now, just by way of information, when the Bible uses the term leprosy, that's a broad Hebrew term. When we today use the word leprosy, we're talking about a very specific disease, normally called Hansen's disease. The Old Testament term for leprosy is broader than Hansen's disease. It includes modern-day leprosy, but it also includes a whole family of various skin-related diseases which were contagious, which were difficult, if not impossible to treat, which caused severe discoloration and disfigurement, and very often the death of the person who contracted it. So leprosy covered a whole range of terrible skin-related diseases. Now, in the Old Testament, in the book of Leviticus, there were certain rules that were given for treating and diagnosing somebody who had leprosy. For instance, if you found some bumps on your arm and they became white and then hair was growing out of the white part, you were told to go to the priest. The priest would examine it, give a certain test, and he might or might not diagnose you as having the disease of leprosy. If you were diagnosed in the Old Testament as a leper, you were cast out of society. You could no longer live with your family. You were sent to live with other lepers in a special village or a special colony. And so hated and so feared was leprosy that if you had the disease, not only were you separated from society, but if you left the other lepers and approached a village of people who did not have the disease, someone would go before you and would shout out, "Unclean, unclean, unclean," so that everybody would know that a leper was in the neighborhood. That's the disease that Naaman had. Now Paul is here to say something because it's important. There are some things money cannot buy. There are some things power cannot cure. There are some things that influence cannot solve. Because Naaman had money, Naaman had power, Naaman had influence, Naaman had the ear of the king of Syria. But all of his money, and all of his power, and all of his influence couldn't do one thing about his leprosy. Folks, you're going to come to a time in your life when you're going to discover that your money and your power and your influence will not be able to solve the deepest problems you have. When that happens, you're going to have to go somewhere else. Upon a day, the Syrians sent a raiding party out into Israel, and the raiding party picked up a young Israelite maiden. They brought her back and made her a servant or a slave in Naaman's household. Evidently, she must have grown fond of Naaman and his wife, because when she realized the extent of Naaman's disease, when she understood that it was leprosy, she said to her mistress, Naaman's wife, "Oh, I wish that my master Naaman could meet the prophet Elisha in Samaria, because if Naaman could meet the prophet could cure him of this terrible disease." When Mrs. Naaman heard that, she told her husband. When her husband told that, he was a man of the world. And a man of the world knows that the way you solve your problems is through money, power, or influence. It's what you have or who you know. He knew the king. And he knew the king of Syria could help him out. So he went to see the king of Syria. And he said, "O king, there is a prophet in Israel. They say he can cure me of my leprosy." Now King Ben-Hadad II was also a man of the world. You know what the king said? He said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll write you a letter." Kings love to do that. Men and women in power love to do that. They love to write letters. They love to make phone calls. They love to say, "Hey, I know somebody who can fix you up. I know somebody who can solve your problem." And so the king of Syria sat down and wrote a letter to the king of Israel, who, by the way, was a man by the name of King Jehoram. Now, King Jehoram was not a good man. He was a bad man, a wicked man. He was not a worshiper of the God of Israel. He had gone far off into idolatry. He was leading the country of Israel down into the pit of moral and spiritual rebellion against God. So the king of Syria writes a letter to the king of Israel. In the letter he says, "O king, here is my servant Naaman. I am sending him to you so you can cure him of leprosy." So upon a day, Naaman leaves Syria for Israel. And you know, no great man ever travels alone. A great man always travels in a caravan. And so Naaman got his soldiers. He got his warriors, his courtiers, his attendants, his armor bearers, his cupbearers. He got his flag bearers. He had his slaves with him. He had all of his people. Down the dusty road of Syria came that cavalcade of Syrian power with disfigured leprous Naaman in the middle. Across the Jordan River into the region of Israel. Across the roads of Israel, the cavalcade of Syrian power came with leprous Naaman in the middle. Eventually that cavalcade of Syrian power came to the palace in Samaria where King Jehoram reigned. When they finally got to the palace, Naaman presented himself with all of his retinue, and he presented the letter to the king. The letter said, "I'm sending this man to you that you could cure him of leprosy." This is what the king of Israel said. Verse 7. As soon as the king of Israel read the letter from the king of Syria, he tore his robes, a sign of fear and anguish and doubt. He tore his robes and said, "Am I God?" What a question. Am I God? Can I kill? Can I bring back to life? You see, as far as the king of Israel was concerned, you know what he's saying? He's saying, you might as well have sent a corpse to me as sent a man with leprosy. I'd have as much luck with a corpse as I would with a leper. Nobody can raise the dead, and nobody can cure leprosy. Because the king of Israel was paranoid. He thought to himself, this is just a setup. The king of Syria knows that I can't do anything about this. He's just using this as an excuse so that when I fail, he can send his army down here and attack me. But Elisha, the prophet of God, heard that Naaman had come to town and heard about his leprosy. He sent a message to the king of Israel. He said, "Send Naaman to me. When I am through with Naaman, everybody will know, and he will know there is a God in Israel." And so, Naaman and his retinue, his courtiers, his attendants, his armor bearers, his cupbearers, his flag bearers, his soldiers, his warriors, his attendants, his slaves, moved from the palace through the streets of Samaria, finally coming to the humble home of Elijah, the prophet of God. "Knock harder!" Finally, the door opens. Only it's not Elisha. Elisha knows he's coming, and he knows why he's coming. Elisha's not going to bother to come to the door. He sends his servant, Gehazi, with some instructions. So Gehazi opens the door, and he sees leprous Naaman with all his retinue and all the soldiers and all standing in front of him. And Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, says to Naaman, the leprous Syrian general, "My lord, the prophet says, go to the Jordan River and dip yourself in the Jordan River 7 times, and you will be cured of leprosy." Naaman, not happy. Verse 11, but Naaman went away angry. King James says wroth. Naaman was wroth. W-O-W-R-O-T-H. I love that word. It means he was chapped. He was ticked. He had it. He had come all this way with his courtiers, with his attendants, with his cupbearers, with his flag bearers, with all of his servants, with all of his slaves, with all of his soldiers, with all of his warriors, made that long trip to Samaria, knocked on the door, tried to be decent. And what do you know? That 2-bit nothing Jewish prophet wouldn't even bother to come to the door. But he sends his servant, his snot-nosed servant, to talk to me, which being interpreted means, don't you know who I am? I'm Naaman. I'm head of the Syrian army. I raise my hand. Armies go out to battle. I lower my hand. The armies come home. I raise my voice. It is done. I change the inflection of my voice. Somebody's thrown into jail. Don't you know that outside the king, I have all power. I am somebody. Don't you be sending your servant to the door. You come yourself. I'm somebody. That's exactly the way he felt. He was offended by what he thought was rude treatment. And he was angry at the suggestion that he should go to the Jordan River. You see, a little geography will help. Here's Samaria. Here's the Jordan River. It's about 25 miles from Samaria to the Jordan River. That meant he had to take his courtiers, his attendants, his cupbearers, his flag bearers, his slaves, his servants, his warriors, his soldiers, his camels, his horses, turn that whole cavalcade around, go through those dusty roads, go to the River Jordan, and there he had to strip and dip 7 times. Strip and dip. That's what I mean. I don't mean strip naked. What I mean is he had to strip himself of every vestige of worldly power. If he had on a military cap, he had to take it off. If he was carrying a sword, he had to put it down. If he was carrying a spear, he had to put it on the bank. If he was wearing the general stars, he had to take them off. If he was wearing the regal robe of the general-in-chief, he had to take it off. And everything about him that spoke of worldly power and authority, he had to strip it off. And he had to become like a common man. He didn't want to make the trip. He didn't want to take off the symbols of his power. He didn't want to dip in the dirty Jordan River. Naaman's got a problem. You know what Naaman's problem is? Same problem a lot of us have. Naaman actually thinks he's somebody. He actually thinks he's somebody. Somebody told him, you're somebody. So now he thinks he's somebody. And you know, when you think you're somebody, you want to be treated like you're somebody. And you really get ticked if you think you're somebody and you're not treated like you're somebody. And that's what's going on here. The prophet's treating him like he's nobody when he thinks he's somebody, and he is really chapped about it. And look what he says here. This is very interesting. He says in verse 11, but Naaman went away wroth, angry. He just stomped away from the prophet's house and said, I thought. Let me tell you something. When you got leprosy, you better not be thinking about anything but doing what the prophet said. When you got leprosy, you don't need any thoughts. You got leprosy. You don't need to be having any theories or any ideas. You see, Naaman here is doing exactly what you and I would do. I mean, we all like to pray, Lord, thy will be done. But if you don't know how to do it, could I give you my idea of how I think your will ought to be done? Lord, thy will be done. And here's my best thought, if it's okay with you. Let me give you my theory about how your will ought to be going down in all this. And he says, I thought. Well, that's his problem right there. Did you know there are times in life when it would be better not to think? Thinking can get you in trouble. There are times when you'd best do what you're told, right? Yeah. There are times. I know. I do know there are times to discuss. But there are also times in life when you're told. And folks, what I'm trying to say is, when God tells you, he's not asking for your opinion. When God says go to the Jordan, he's not saying, well, like if you feel like it. Or like if it's not too much trouble now, would you go to the Jordan? Or I'd like you to go to the Jordan and dip 7 times, but if you'd rather go 3, that's fine with me. You see, Naaman comes with a theory of how he should be healed. Look what he says. This is kind of amazing to me. He said, I thought he, that is Elisha, would surely come out of the house and would pamper me and treat me like a big guy and really kind of make over me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. You know what Naaman's problem is? He's been watching too many of those Saturday night healing programs on Christian TV. He wants the prophet to come out in that white suit, stand up there with the choir singing. Pastor, this is Brother Naaman. He has leprosy. Brother Naaman, do you believe? Heal! Choir sings and everybody cheers. I'm going to get in trouble for that. I'm already in trouble for that. Thank you. It's in there. It's in there. He wanted to show He wants a show. He doesn't want to just be healed. He wants to dictate the terms of his own healing. He wants a show so that with all of his regalia and all of his stars and all of his bars and all of his military stuff, he can be healed right there. Big show. Big show's what he wants. Listen, when are we going to learn God does not make deals? He does not make deals. Our God does not negotiate. That's why we call him God. He sets the terms, and the terms are you either go to the Jordan or you die of leprosy. Those are the terms. Now, which part of that did you want to do? Naaman's got his own idea here. See, the problem is, I've already said this, but I'm going to repeat it because it seems very important to me. Problem is, Naaman thinks he's somebody. And he thinks he deserves special treatment because he's somebody. Because somebody told him he was somebody. He don't want to be treated like a nobody. And God's saying, the only people I heal are nobodies. So as soon as you're ready to become a nobody, you can be healed. As long as you're somebody, you cannot be healed. But you give up who you think you are, then you can see something happen. That's the deal. So verse 12, this is really good. Verse 12 is, this is Naaman's counter offer to God. He doesn't want to go to the Jordan River. Are not the Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than any of the rivers of Israel? He's a Syrian. My rivers are better than your rivers. Yours are dirty, mine are clean. I like my rivers better. My country's better than your country. Do I smell a little ethnic pride here? A little look down your nose at the Israelite rivers? Your river stinks. My river's clean. I want to do it in my river. Oh, by the way, how many of you ever been to the Jordan River? Raise your hands. Raise your hands. Good. Good. I tell you this. You know what's funny about this story? When he says, why can't I go to the Abana? That's better than the Jordan. You know what's funny about this story? Naaman was right. The Abana River was, in that day and for many hundreds of years afterwards, a clear, crystal clear, cool, flowing river that came out of the mountains in Syria, flowed right down through the middle of Damascus. An incredibly beautiful river, crystal clear. It's the kind of place where rich kings and generals would buy land for a summer home. They're going to go to the Abana River, and it's a beautiful place to be. In fact, in later times, the Greeks and the Romans called the Abana River the River of God. They called it the Golden River. It truly was beautiful and clear. It's exactly the place, if you wanted to see a miracle, it's where you'd want to go. And the Jordan River, those of you who've been in the Jordan River, you know what it's like. I've been there. I've baptized people there. You know what a river is? A river to me is the Mississippi River. That's a river. I mean, a serious river, It's like 1.5 miles wide, Fantastic, great river. You go over to the Jordan River, it's like some places 20, 30, 40, 50 feet wide. You can throw a rock from one side to the other. So windy. And back then they did everything in the river. I don't want to go into that, And during the rainy season, the silt would come up. You put your hand down in that muddy Jordan River and you couldn't see your hand at all. Yeah, the Abana River is clear and the Jordan is small and it is muddy and it is insignificant. And Naaman, if you want to be healed, you got to come to God's river. You got to come to God's river. Because if you don't come to God's river, muddy or not, you will not be healed. Now, he wants no part of that. So he's starting to leave. He's walking. He's saying, I've had this with his cupbearer, armor bearer, servants, retinue, soldiers, warriors, horses, camel. We are going back to Syria. I've had enough of this junk. But thankfully, he had at least one servant who was smarter than he was. By the way, 2 points. Pride can make smart people do some very stupid things. You ever done anything stupid just because of your pride got the best of you? Yeah. And sometimes the simple things are the hardest things to do. And so he has a servant who says, "Oh, master, wait before you leave." Look at verse 13. "My father," speaking of Naaman, "if the prophet had told you to do something hard, wouldn't you have done it? How much more then when he tells you wash and be clean?" And here's the argument. Naaman, if he had said, "Give $1 million," you would have said, "Give me my checkbook," and you would have started writing that check. If he had said, "Cut yourself in 10 places and offer it on the altar," you would have said, "Give me the knife and tell me where to cut." If he had said, "There's a field of broken glass, crawl a mile on a field of broken glass," you would have dropped down on all fours and crawled across it immediately, because you're a powerful man. You're a can-do man. You want a part of your own healing. You want to feel like you've made your own contribution. And the prophet is saying, no, there's nothing you can do. And if you try to do anything, if you try to do something to earn it, you won't receive it. If you'll receive it, it'll come to you as a gift. Thanks, I needed that. And so Naaman turns around and he says, "Let's go to the Jordan River." And so they make the journey with the big cavalcade of Syrian power. And they get to the Jordan River. And there he takes off all the symbols of worldly power. And by the way, remember, the healing did not come gradually. It came all at once. So he dips himself in the water. He goes down once. He comes up, covered with leprosy. Goes down again. He comes up, covered with leprosy. Goes down a third time. Comes up, covered with scabs. Goes down the fourth time, covered with all the scales and the marks. Goes down the fifth time. Comes up, just as leprous as when he started. Goes down the sixth time. Comes up, still covered with leprosy. And I am sure he thought to himself, "I've been played for a fool. This guy is nothing but a scam artist. This is the stupidest thing I ever heard in my life." And that servant probably said, "Oh, master, you've gone this far. Go down one more time." He went down the seventh time, all the way under the water. And when he came up, leprosy was gone. His skin was white and soft and smooth as the skin of a baby. Healed, completely, absolutely cured by the power of God. And he went to see Elisha the prophet. He does two things. He says, number one, "Now I know there is no God but the God of Israel. No more this God, Assyrian God of Israel. There's one God." Meaning, he was not just cured on the outside, he was healed on the inside. He's now a believer in the true God. And number two, he says, You've healed me. I'd like to give you some money." And Elisha says, "No, keep your money." You know why he said keep the money? He said keep the money because the healing didn't come from the prophet. The healing came from God. He said keep the money. You know why? So that in years later, Naaman could never say, "Well, yeah, I was healed, but boy, I paid a pretty penny for it." He could never take any credit. So, last night, the Allied force had a road rally. And it has 60, 70 of our high school students, many of them who are here this morning. And I did not, and I still do not really understand all the rules of this particular game, but I know this much. They divided into different groups, and they were given instructions, and they were sent all over Oak Park and River Forest, and there were people out there at different places, at the Cyber Cafe and at the Scoville Park and at the L Station and in different places, and you would go and you had to give a password, and the different teams were sent in different places, so like 9 teams going out, and you had to give the password, and then you had to do something different, and I guess at each place, and I guess whoever won, maybe they got a pizza. I don't know what it was. I never really figured out the end of it all. But I did know this much. Our house was one of the stops on the road rally last night. That much I do know. Which meant that between 7:30 and about 9:15 last night, there were 9 different groups of our high school students who came by our house. And when they came in, the password to our house was sports. They all came in and see, they didn't know. Nobody knew before they came in what they had to do. And their assignment, the assignment for our group, for the groups that came to our house was, you got to pick somebody who will get up in front of the other people in your group in our living room and do their best imitation of Pastor Ray preaching. And they all laughed. Every group laughed just like you laughed right then. And what was hilarious was as the night went on and the 9 groups did their thing, first of all, there was no shortage of volunteers, and all 9 of them, without any prearrangement at all, they all 9 did exactly the same thing. They walked up here and said, "So, how are you doing?" "No, I mean, how are you doing?" Then they went over here and said, "And this is the book of Genesis, and this is David and Goliath, and this is Greece, and over here is the book of Revelation over here." And then they marched back and said, and what I'm trying to say is, run to the cross. They say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and I take it. And they were all the same, and without any, they all did exactly the same thing. And except for one person at the, sort of one of the guys at the very beginning, did that, did everything I just did the run to the cross. And while everybody was laughing, he said, "Now you can rip that great big G off your sweatshirt." That's pretty good, because I hadn't said that in a while. He said, the big G, the God. Rip the big G off. Don't have to be God anymore. You see, Naaman could not be healed until he ripped the big G off. As long as he had to be in control, he could not be healed. As long as he had to be treated as if he was somebody, he could not get better. As long as he had to pretend to be God of his own life, he could not. He was going to die of leprosy. But once he ripped that big G off and went down to the Jordan River, then he was healed. Then he was healed. There's an old Shaker hymn that goes, "'Tis a gift to be simple. 'Tis a gift to be free. 'Tis a gift to come down where you ought to be." That was Naaman's problem. That's our problem. We don't want to come down where we ought to be. And you cannot be healed until you do. You cannot get better until you do. As long as you say, "I'm somebody. I'm somebody," you got to treat me this way, you're going to get worse. And once you come down where you ought to be with the rest of the human race, once you're ready to go into the dirty waters of the Jordan River and do whatever God says, then you can be healed. Last week, Greg and Carolyn Kirshner, our missionaries in Jos, Nigeria, sent us on the prayer list a thing about prayer in Nigeria. And they said they had seen on the side of a public bus. Over there, a public bus is really like a private bus that you rent out, and Christians own a lot of them. And so you can put Bible verses on your own van, and so you can ride the John 3:16 bus all the way across town. And they had seen one with 4 words on it. Man be no God. Man no be God. Man no be God. That's what Naaman had to figure out, that he was not God. So, it was yesterday afternoon, and I was at the high school stadium for the football game between Oak Park and Lyons Township. It was a long, hard, cold afternoon. Hard day for the good guys yesterday. Our Calvary guys did well. We got a lot of players on the team, but it was a hard day for the good guys. Kept my eye on that left tackle, cheering for him, doing what I could. We got somewhere in the middle of the game, and I heard a voice say, "Pastor Ray, Pastor Ray." And it was somebody from our congregation who was here earlier this morning, and they said, "Pastor Ray, Pastor Ray," and they were just a few feet away. And I got up and went over to see him because I was glad for a break for a minute. And so I went over to see him, and the woman said, "Pastor Ray, you know that sermon series you just started calling about overcoming, the one you preached last week, and you gave us that list of overcoming all the problems of life." I said, "Yeah." She was just talking a mile a minute. She said, "Pastor Ray, I could provide you with information. I could provide you with personal stories in every single one of those categories." I said, I know her pretty well. I said, yes, I know you could. And she could. And she said to me, she said, I'm in a 12-step program, and I knew that. She said, I'm doing well. It's obvious to me she's doing very well. And she said, I've learned something very important. She said, I used to think it was food, or it was alcohol, or drugs, or sex, or money. I used to think that was the issue. So it's either you eat or you don't eat, or you drink or you don't drink, or you gamble or you don't gamble, or the sex is the issue. I used to think all that, or even drugs, that was the issue. You either do drugs or you don't do drugs. And she said, and for years I couldn't get better because I thought it was either I did something or I didn't do something. And I kept just falling back into the same old pattern. And she said, it took me a long time to understand that those things are just a symptom, that the real cause is down in my heart. And she said, it took me a long time to understand there's a void in my life. And if I don't fill that void with God, I will fill it with other things. And she said, I struggled for years just dealing with the things and not with the void. And she said, now I've come to understand I have to fill the void in my life with God. And she said, now I'm finally getting better. And she is. And she added this word. She said, Pastor Ray, last Sunday, you said it. You said it 2 or 3 times. You said, at some point, we've got to surrender. And she said, I fought against that for years because I did not want to surrender. And I finally discovered when I did surrender and say, Lord, I'm not going to fight you anymore. Come and be the Lord of every part of my life and fill me from the inside out. I found strength I never knew I had before. But you got to put down your weapons. You got to strip off all the stuff in which you're trusting. And you got to go down to the River Jordan and do what the Lord has said. One reason we're not better is because we've not come to the place where we've surrendered. We're still fighting. We want God on our own terms. We want healing on our own terms. All of us by nature are deal makers and negotiators. We all are. And God says, I don't make deals. I do not make deals. And whenever we do what Naaman finally did, after we get through being angry and making all of our excuses, just say, okay, I will. Lord, I'll do it your way. Then the healing comes. Then the forgiveness comes. And then we see the power of God released. Final thought, and I'm done. It just hit me as I've been thinking about this. What would you do? How much would you give to be cured of cancer if you had terminal cancer? You'd give everything. What if one of your children had terminal cancer? You'd give more than everything. You'd give more than everything. Why is it that it takes a crisis for us to figure out what matters and what doesn't? When will we learn that all this self-important boasting doesn't matter a hill of beans? And whenever we finally say, Lord, the battle's over, you win. When we go down into the muddy Jordan, then the miracles can finally begin.